My twin sister was in a car accident and showed my ID. My name is Emily, and I'm 25 years old. I grew up in a house where love wasn't equally measured, where warmth had favorites, and where the silence that followed hurt was louder than any argument. My family of 6 could have been the picture of togetherness, but even photographs can lie. I had 2 older brothers, James and Michael, who were my champions. And then there was Ashley, my twin, who held the golden ticket to our parents' affection. One summer afternoon when I was around 10, we were all gathered in the living room. The air hummed with the buzz of cicadas outside, and my mother sat with a magazine, her eyes barely flicking upward. Ashley, sitting cross-legged on the rug, was showing off her latest drawing, a princess in a gown so detailed it seemed to shimmer. "Look, Mom," she beamed, her blue eyes bright with hope. My mother glanced up and gave her a soft, approving smile. "It's beautiful, sweetheart. You always create such lovely things." I shifted in my seat, a simple stick figure doodle in my own hand, and hesitated before speaking. "I made one too," I said, my voice almost swallowed by the room. Silence. My father was reading the newspaper, and the rustle of the pages was the only response. Ashley's eyes darted to mine, and for a fleeting moment, there was an unreadable look. Was it pity or something else? My heart clenched, and I dropped my drawing to my lap. James, 13 at the time, had been watching from the doorway. He stepped inside, a grin lighting up his freckled face as he tried to bridge the gap between the golden child and the one in the shadow. "Hey, Em," he said, scooping up my drawing. "This is awesome. Is this me? The one with the spiky hair?" I nodded, my cheeks warming as he winked at me. "Looks just like me. You got talent, kiddo." A grin cracked my stoic expression. But as I glanced at our parents, the hollow ache returned. My mother's gaze had already moved past me, back to Ashley, who was explaining her masterpiece in great detail. My father turned a page, the sound punctuating the moment. Later that night, when the house had gone quiet, James crept into my room with a flashlight and a smirk. "We're building a fortress tonight," he whispered, holding up a blanket. Michael soon joined, a bag of marshmallows in hand, and we huddled under our makeshift fort, laughing and telling stories until the ache in my chest softened. "I wish you'd stay forever," I whispered when Michael yawned, ready to leave for bed. James ruffled my hair, his grin turning serious. "We'll always be here, Em, even when we're not. But promises made in the dark are hard to keep in the light." When James went off to college, Michael followed soon after, and suddenly, the fortress wasn't enough. The house was bigger, colder, and full of shadows that had no names but felt like loneliness. Ashley continued to shine, a natural performer who always knew just what to say to draw laughter from my parents. She was the center of family dinners, the first to get attention when she laughed, the one to receive gentle hugs when she cried. And me? I learned early on that trying to compete for their affection was a race I'd never win. One night, after another evening where Ashley's achievements were toasted while mine were forgotten, I sat on the porch steps, staring out at the darkened street. The cool air wrapped around me as I heard the door creak open behind me. "Em?" It was Michael, home for the weekend. He sat down beside me, the silence stretching until it became comfortable. "Did you hear?" I whispered, not trusting my voice. "Ashley got the lead in the school play. Mom and Dad are taking her out tomorrow to celebrate." Michael leaned forward, elbows on his knees, eyes thoughtful. "Yeah, I heard." A pause. "You're more than this, you know," he said quietly, not looking at me. "More than their approval. You've got something they don't see. Do you?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. He turned to face me, a soft smile on his lips. "Yeah, I do." The wind picked up, rustling the leaves, and for a moment I believed him. As the years passed, the differences between Ashley and me grew more pronounced. It wasn't that our parents disliked me. It was that they simply didn't understand me. My mother, ever the organized hostess, found joy in making everything perfect. Ashley fit seamlessly into that world, her laughter and flair a perfect echo of what Mom wanted in a daughter. Meanwhile, I was quieter, more prone to slipping away with a book or exploring ideas that didn't spark interest at the dinner table. One evening, when I was about 15, we sat down for dinner. Our typical scene of clinking cutlery and mild chatter. Ashley was recounting the latest gossip from school, her words animated and filled with expressions that made my father chuckle. And then Melissa tripped in front of everyone. I swear, I thought Mrs. Parker's face would turn purple. Ashley said, eyes wide, her fork suspended mid-air for dramatic effect. Mom chuckled softly, glancing at my father. You girls always have the best stories. I half smiled, tracing the edge of my plate with a finger. I wanted to share the news that I'd gotten a top score on my biology project, but the moment never seemed right. The conversation rolled on, carrying everyone along like a wave I couldn't catch. Emily, how was your day? Dad's voice broke through, gentle, but almost absent-minded. My breath caught at the rare acknowledgement. I did well on my project, I said a touch too quickly, looking at them hopefully. Ashley, ever unaware, spoke over me. Oh, and I forgot to mention, I'm trying out for the track team tomorrow. The attention swung back to her, and I watched as my mother's eyes lit up. That's wonderful, Ashley. I know you'll do great. The moment slipped away, leaving only the clink of my fork as I pushed my food around my plate. It wasn't resentment I felt, but a kind of quiet acceptance, like the muted glow of a fire that never blazed too brightly. Later, James called. His voice on the other end of the phone felt like an anchor. How's it going, Em? Still top of your class, I bet? I smiled despite myself. Yeah, just the usual, I said, the day's disappointment dissolving like sugar in tea. Hey, don't let them make you feel small, okay? His voice was firm, carrying that older brother certainty that had kept me going more times than I could count. It's not that bad, I said, more to convince myself than him. He sighed. It's just for now, Em. You'll find your place. I wanted to believe him, so I nodded into the phone, listening as he described his college adventures, the new friends he'd made, and the future that suddenly felt so distant from the four walls of my room. The next day, as I buried myself in schoolwork, I found myself watching Ashley out of the corner of my eye. She was chatting with her friends by the lockers, hair perfect, gestures grand. For a moment, our eyes met, and she smiled at me, a genuine smile. It wasn't her fault she fit in so perfectly, and deep down, I knew she didn't realize how much space her light took up. The bell rang, jolting me back to reality. I took a deep breath, letting the crowded hall swallow me as I walked away, my feet carrying me to the library where things made sense, and the voices in my head were the only ones I needed to hear. High school passed in a blur of classes, exams, and whispered conversations in hallways. The differences between Ashley and me became starker, like contrasting brushstrokes on the same canvas. While I focused on my grades and after-school clubs, Ashley's world revolved around social gatherings, sports practices, and sleepovers. It was like watching two movies play side by side, one filled with lively parties and laughter, the other quiet scenes and pages turning late into the night. One Saturday morning, our mom decided to host a family brunch, complete with homemade waffles and a spread of fruit that looked like it belonged in a magazine. As we sat around the table, the light from the window cast a soft glow across Ashley's face, making her seem even more radiant. So, girls, Mom said, eyes darting between us as she poured orange juice. Have you thought about college? Applications are coming up fast. Ashley leaned back, a confident smile breaking across her lips. I'm applying to state, obviously. They've got a great track program, and some of my friends are going there too. Dad nodded approvingly. That's a good choice, Ash. You'll do well. I shifted in my seat, clearing my throat. I'm applying to a few schools too. I'm hoping for a scholarship. The words felt small compared to Ashley's declarations. Mom looked at me, her expression unreadable. Well, you've always done well in school, Emily. I'm sure you'll manage. There it was, manage. The one-word summation that always felt like a pat on the head, acknowledging effort, but lacking enthusiasm. Ashley turned to me with a grin that only she could pull off without sounding condescending. Hey, if we end up at the same college, it could be fun, right? The twins taking on college. I mustered a smile, nodding while trying to keep the tightness in my chest from surfacing. Yeah, could be. After brunch, James called. He'd made it a habit to check in every few weeks, his voice like a lifeline to the world outside our small town. "How's college prep going?" he asked, the clatter of his dorm in the background. "It's fine," I said, sitting on my bed and picking at a loose thread on my comforter. "Ash wants to go to state. And you?" His tone shifted, gentle yet probing. "I don't know, James. I want to go somewhere that feels new, I guess. A place where people don't already know who I am, or who I'm not." He chuckled softly. "Yeah, I get that. You've always been different, and that's not a bad thing. Remember that?" "Okay." Before I could answer, there was a knock on my door. Ashley stood there, one hand gripping the frame, an unreadable expression on her face. "Can we talk?" she asked, eyes soft. I covered the phone. "You sure?" She walked in, glancing around the room as if noticing it for the first time. "Do you think we're really that different?" she asked, sitting on the edge of my bed. The question caught me off guard. "I guess we are," I admitted, shrugging. "But that's okay." She nodded, eyes distant for a moment before flicking back to mine. "Well, maybe we'll surprise each other." And just like that, the conversation ended as abruptly as it began. She stood up, gave me a small smile, and walked out, leaving the door open behind her. I sat there, the thread still clenched between my fingers, wondering if the path we were on was finally leading somewhere unexpected, or just another parting of ways. The excitement of college acceptance quickly faded into a tense reality. The summer before we left for school was filled with preparations, shopping for dorm supplies, picking out bedspreads, and discussing what our new lives would look like. Mom was in her element, bustling between stores with a determined sparkle in her eye, calling out to Ashley about colors and matching pillows. I tagged along, holding onto the corner of the cart and feeling like a spectator. One evening, Dad gathered us in the living room. The air smelled of Mom's lavender candle, sweet and familiar. He cleared his throat and looked at Ashley with pride. "This is a big step, girls. Your mother and I are proud of you both." Ashley beamed, the golden child soaking in the glow. I tried to catch his eye, to see if he'd look at me with the same warmth, but his gaze drifted past. He reached for the stack of paperwork on the coffee table. "We've sorted out most of the details, but there's still tuition to consider. Emily got that scholarship, so she's covered," Mom said quickly, her tone light, as if it was a casual mention. "Ashley, we'll take care of your fees, don't worry." There it was again, the reminder that my achievements were practical, helpful, but not cause for celebration. I looked over at Ashley, who met my eyes and smiled, unaware of the sting her ease brought. Later that night, Ashley knocked on my bedroom door. She came in without waiting for an answer, flopping onto my bed as she had 1,000 times before. "Can you believe we're doing this? College. It's going to be epic, Em." I mustered a small smile, pulling my knees to my chest. "Yeah, it'll be something." She noticed my hesitation, tilting her head. "What's up? You been off all week?" "Nothing," I lied, my voice barely above a whisper. "Just nervous, I guess." Ashley reached out, a rare show of vulnerability crossing her face. "Hey, whatever happens, we got each other, right?" For a moment, I believed her. For a moment, the weight lifted, and it felt like we were truly twins, bonded and ready for whatever came next. But as the days ticked down and we packed our bags, the feeling didn't last. I couldn't shake the sense that college would test us in ways we'd never expected. College started with a flurry of excitement and adjustments. Ashley and I settled into our respective dorms, which were just close enough to bump into each other, but far enough that our paths rarely crossed. I spent my time buried in books, joining study groups, and volunteering at a local animal shelter. Meanwhile, Ashley embraced college life like it was made for her, cheering at football games, joining the social elite, and slipping into a circle that thrived on parties and late nights. At first, I tried to keep tabs on her, convincing myself it was just sisterly concern. But as the semester wore on, the gossip reached even the quiet corners of the library where I studied. Friends would mention seeing Ashley at yet another party, the music loud enough to shake the walls and keep the campus buzzing. I told myself it was just a phase, something she'd outgrow once she settled in. But the change in her was undeniable. One evening, as I walked back to my dorm after a late shift at the shelter, my phone buzzed. The screen lit up with Ashley's name, and a knot formed in my stomach. "Hey, Em?" Her voice was slurred, words blending together. I need you. Are you okay? Where are you?" I quickened my pace, already searching for the nearest campus shuttle. "There was an accident. I'm in my dorm," she whispered, and the line went dead. By the time I reached her building, my pulse was hammering in my chest. I pushed open her door to find her sitting on the floor, knees pulled up to her chest, eyes rimmed with red. "Ashley, what happened?" I said, dropping to my knees beside her. She looked up at me, fear and regret fighting for dominance on her face. "I was driving back from a party. I wasn't thinking. I hit a wall. The police came, and I used your ID. The room spun, and I grabbed the edge of the bed for support." "What do you mean you used my ID?" I whispered, horror blooming in my chest. Ashley's voice cracked. "I panicked him. If they find out it's me, I'm done. Mom and Dad know. They said they'd help keep this under control. But they need you to. They need you to take the blame." "Are you serious?" I felt the rage building, breaking through the disbelief. "Ashley, this could ruin me." Tears slipped down her cheeks. "Please, you know how important it is. I can't lose everything." Before I could respond, my phone buzzed with a text from Mom. "We need to talk. Come home this weekend. It's important." At home, the tension was palpable. Mom and Dad sat at the kitchen table, faces drawn and serious. Ashley sat to the side, eyes downcast. "Emily," Dad began, running a hand over his face. "We know this isn't fair. But Ashley's future is on the line. She's not as strong as you." I looked between them, disbelief turning to a raw, painful clarity. "So you want me to take the fall? Get expelled? Ruin my life so she can go on pretending nothing happened?" Mom leaned forward, her eyes glistening. "This is about protecting family. We wouldn't ask if there was another way." The betrayal felt suffocating, pressing down until I struggled to breathe. "Family?" I echoed. "Is that what this is?" Ashley sniffed, finally raising her eyes to meet mine. "I'm sorry," she whispered, but the words were hollow, like an echo in a vast, empty room. I stood up, the chair scraping against the floor. "I can't do this," I said, my voice breaking. But their silence was answer enough. They weren't asking, they were telling me. Days later, I was called into the university's administration office. The police were there, along with a stern-faced dean. "You are being expelled for driving under the influence and property damage," he stated. My protest fell on deaf ears. The ID was mine. The statements backed it up. Ashley's betrayal was complete, and my parents' silence sealed it. With nowhere left to turn, I packed up my life into 2 suitcases and found a small apartment across town. The scholarship, the classes, the life I'd built, it was all gone. I worked double shifts at a bookstore, piecing together enough to stay afloat. Ashley, meanwhile, went on with her life, our parents ensuring her path remained clear. The days turned into weeks, and the weeks into months. My new life was quiet and stark, stripped of the routine and ambition that had once driven me. Mornings were for early shifts at the bookstore, where the scent of coffee and paper masked the ache of exhaustion. Evenings were spent in my small apartment, where the walls felt closer each night. But it was mine, a place free of shadows, expectations, and the lingering echoes of betrayal. One rainy afternoon, as I was stocking a shelf, a familiar voice called out from behind me. "Emily?" I turned to find James standing there, the years since he left for college visible in the sharp angles of his face and the lines of concern etched across his brow. Relief flooded through me, threatening to break down the careful walls I'd built. Without a word, he pulled me into a hug, tight and fierce. "I've been calling him. Mom said you were fine," but his voice trailed off as he pulled back to search my eyes. "They weren't telling me the truth, were they?" The lump in my throat refused to budge. "No, they weren't." We sat in the small cafe attached to the bookstore, the rain tapping gently on the windows as James listened to the full story, his jaw tightening with every detail. I hadn't realized how much I needed to tell someone, how heavy it had been to carry alone. I can't believe them, he said finally, anger simmering beneath the surface. They let this happen? To you? Just to protect Ashley? I nodded, feeling the sting of those words all over again. They did, and she hasn't reached out once since. James clenched his fists, then forced himself to relax. I should have come sooner. I knew something was wrong, but I didn't push. It wouldn't have changed anything, I said, taking a shaky sip of my tea. I had to get out, James, even if it meant losing everything. He sighed, leaning back in his chair and staring at the rain. You're stronger than any of them, Em. You'll get through this. For the first time in what felt like forever, I believed it a little. James's visit breathed life into the parts of me that had started to go numb. He stayed for the weekend, filling the silence of my apartment with laughter and stories from his travels. For those few days, the world felt a little more bearable. But life didn't stop for me to catch my breath. The bookstore job barely covered rent, and the weight of my uncertain future gnawed at me. One night, after a long shift, my phone buzzed with an unknown number. I answered cautiously. Emily, it's Dad, came the voice on the other end, thick with tension. I closed my eyes, the flood of emotions washing over me. Why are you calling? There was a pause, and I could almost picture him standing in the hallway of our old house, phone to his ear, the light catching on the picture frames filled with Ashley's triumphs. We need to talk. Things have gotten complicated in Ashley. She's not doing well. A bitter laugh escaped before I could stop it. Now you care? Now, when everything's gone wrong for her, you reach out to me? Emily, please, he said, his voice softer, almost pleading. We made mistakes, but we're still family. No, I said, the words sharp and certain. You made your choice, Dad. I made mine. The silence on the line stretched, heavy and full of things left unsaid. Finally, I ended the call and dropped my phone onto the couch, the weight of the conversation pressing down on me like a storm cloud. Outside, the city lights twinkled, indifferent to my struggles. But they reminded me that life moved on, and so would I. The city was shrouded in the quiet haze of early morning when I was jolted awake by the sound of relentless knocking. I sat up, heart thumping as I glanced at the clock. 5:12 a.m. groggy and confused, I pulled on my robe and walked to the door, every step filled with mounting dread. The moment I opened it, my breath caught. Mom and Dad stood there, faces pale and etched with exhaustion. Dad's hair, once so meticulously combed, was disheveled, and Mom's eyes, usually sharp, were ringed with red. They looked like strangers. Emily, Mom began, her voice trembling. We need to talk. I opened the door wider, letting them in more out of shock than willingness. The living room, usually my safe haven, felt smaller with them standing there, bringing a cold wind of past betrayals. What's going on? I asked, crossing my arms over my chest. Dad sighed, sinking into the chair by the window. He looked older, lines of worry deepening as he stared at the floor. It's Ashley, he said, his voice barely more than a whisper. She forged the deeds to the house, sold it without our knowledge. We're being evicted. The room spun for a moment. I clenched my fist to steady myself. She what? I spat, disbelief sharpening my tone. And you're telling me this now? After everything she's done? Mom took a step forward, her eyes pleading. Emily, please. We know we've wronged you, but we have nowhere to go. Ashley's in trouble, and so are we. We need your help. A cold anger surged in my chest. Help? After you asked me to ruin my life for her? After you watched me lose everything and did nothing? Dad finally looked up, eyes hollow. We didn't know it would come to this. We thought we were protecting her. Protecting her? I echoed, the words tasting bitter. You protected her at my expense. And now you want me to clean up her mess? Again? Mom's hands trembled as she reached for me, but I stepped back. Emily, we're begging you. We need time to figure this out. If we go to the police now, she'll be arrested, and she should be. I shouted, the years of suppressed rage bubbling to the surface. Why do you keep protecting her? Look where it's gotten you. There was silence, the weight of truth pressing down on us. Mom's eyes filled with tears, but she said nothing, and Dad's jaw tightened, a flicker of defiance in his stare. Even now, they were holding on to the twisted hope that their golden child could be saved from consequences she'd long earned. I took a deep breath, steadying my voice. I can't do this anymore. You came here looking for help, but you're still trying to protect Ashley instead of facing what she's done. If you don't go to the police, I will. The color drained from Mom's face. You wouldn't? Try me, I said, my voice cold and resolute. The room fell silent again, the only sound the faint hum of traffic outside. Dad stood up slowly, shoulders slumping in defeat. We'll find another way, he murmured, not meeting my eyes. As they turned to leave, Mom looked back, a tear slipping down her cheek. We're sorry, Emily. But the words were empty, floating in the air long after the door closed behind them. I stood there, heart pounding, the realization settling deep in my bones. I was truly alone now, but maybe that was the only way to be free. The day after my parents' visit, the tension in my small apartment felt suffocating. Their pleas echoed in my mind, clashing with the anger that simmered just below the surface. Ashley's shadow loomed large, even in her absence, a constant reminder of the choices that had fractured our family beyond repair. A knock at my door jolted me from my thoughts. I hesitated, half expecting my parents to be standing there again, but it was James. He walked in without waiting for an invitation, eyes scanning my face. Mom called, he said, voice tight. Told me everything. I sank into the chair by the window, running a hand through my hair. Then you know why they were here. They wanted me to help them avoid the police, to cover for Ashley. Again, James's expression darkened. He paced the room, fists clenching and unclenching. This is madness. She forged the house deeds? How deep does this go? Deep enough that they're facing eviction, I said, the exhaustion heavy in my voice. And even now, they're protecting her. James let out a sharp breath. This has to stop him. They can't keep enabling her. I told them I'd go to the police if they didn't. I admitted, my voice quieter. But I don't know if I can actually do it. They're still our parents, James. He sat down across from me, his eyes searching mine. I know, but what choice do we have? Ashley has burned every bridge, and if they keep shielding her, it'll only get worse. A tense silence fell between us, broken only by the rhythmic ticking of the clock. Finally, James spoke, his voice softer. We need to talk to them. Together. Make them understand that this is the end of the line. The next evening, James and I drove to our parents' temporary motel room. The place was small and dingy, with faded wallpaper and a stale smell that hung in the air. Mom opened the door, eyes widening when she saw both of us standing there. Dad sat on the bed, shoulders hunched, looking like a man who'd aged a decade overnight. We need to talk, James said, his tone leaving no room for argument. We gathered in the cramped room, the silence thick as we sat. Finally, I spoke. Mom, Dad, this has to end. Ashley's choices have caught up with her. And if you don't stop shielding her, she'll take you down too. Mom's hands twisted nervously in her lap. Emily, we know. But the thought of her in jail, we couldn't bear it. Dad looked up, eyes weary. She's our daughter. You don't just give up on your child. James's voice was calm but firm. And neither do you throw another under the bus to save one. You let Emily pay the price once, but not again. This time, Ashley has to face the consequences. Tears welled up in Mom's eyes. We thought we were protecting her, she whispered, voice cracking. No, I said, softer now. You were protecting yourselves from the shame, from admitting that she's not who you wanted her to be. The room fell silent as the truth settled over us, heavy and suffocating. Dad exhaled shakily, rubbing his temples. What do we do? James leaned forward, his gaze steady. We go to the police. We tell them what happened. If we don't, this cycle will never end. Mom's face crumpled as she nodded, the fight leaving her eyes. For the first time, I saw the exhaustion of years of denial, and I felt a pang of sympathy. They had clung to hope so tightly that it had blinded them. I'll go with you, I said, surprising myself. We'll face it together. It wasn't forgiveness, not yet, but it was a step toward something else, maybe understanding, maybe peace. And for now, that had to be enough. The following morning, a chill clung to the air as we stood in front of the police station, the red brick building looming like a silent witness to what was about to unfold. My parents exchanged nervous glances, their eyes bloodshot from a sleepless night. James stood next to me, a pillar of quiet strength. Dad's hand trembled as he reached for the door. "We're doing the right thing," he muttered, almost as if trying to convince himself. "Yes, you are," James said, his voice low but steady. "This ends today." The inside of the station was a stark contrast to the world outside, buzzing with the harsh ring of telephones, the clatter of keyboards, and the muffled conversations of officers. The sergeant on duty looked up as we approached the desk, eyes flicking between us with practiced indifference. "Can I help you?" she asked, pen poised over her notepad. Dad cleared his throat, his voice faltering. "We need to report a case of fraud." The words seemed to echo in the space around us. As he detailed what had happened, how Ashley had forged their signatures, sold the house, and left them facing eviction, I watched Mom's face. She nodded at the right moments, a tear slipping down her cheek when Dad's voice cracked. There was no more defense, no more justifications, only the raw, painful truth. When it was my turn to speak, I felt James's reassuring hand on my shoulder. "She's been doing this for years," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "And each time, it's gotten worse because we covered for her." The sergeant's expression softened slightly as she took notes, the lines around her eyes deepening with understanding. "Thank you for coming forward," she said, her tone surprisingly gentle. "It's not easy to report a loved one." "It's not," Mom whispered, staring at her hands. "But it's necessary." The formalities followed, a series of questions, forms to sign, and assurances that the case would be taken seriously. Each pen stroke felt like a small release, the weight of years lifting piece by painful piece. Later, as we stepped outside, the crisp air hit us, sharp and bracing. Mom clutched her coat tighter around her, looking frail in a way I'd never seen before. "Emily," she said, turning to me, her voice raw, "I'm sorry. For everything. You deserved better than what we gave you." I met her eyes, searching for sincerity. It was there, buried beneath layers of guilt and regret. "It's going to take time," I said honestly. "But maybe one day we'll be okay." Dad reached out hesitantly, his hand resting on my arm. "Thank you for not walking away. We won't forget that." James stood a little taller, pride flickering in his eyes as he looked at me. "You've done more than any of us could ask him. It's time for them to step up." The weeks that followed were a whirlwind of legal proceedings, strained conversations, and tentative steps toward mending what had been shattered. News of Ashley's arrest reached me through the cold formality of a phone call from the family lawyer. She had turned herself in, pressured by the mounting evidence and the realization that her safety net had finally unraveled. I expected to feel a rush of satisfaction, maybe even vindication, but instead, there was only a strange sense of emptiness. Ashley's downfall was never what I wanted. All I had ever wanted was for the lies to stop and for the truth to matter. One evening, as winter tightened its grip on the city, I sat in my small living room, the muted glow of a single lamp casting soft shadows on the walls. The knock on my door startled me. When I opened it, Mom stood there, bundled in a thick coat, her eyes reflecting the streetlight's pale gleam. "May I come in?" she asked, voice quiet. I stepped aside, and she moved past me, glancing around at the small, cozy space. "It's nice here," she said, a touch of wistfulness in her tone. I sat down on the couch, gesturing for her to take the armchair opposite. For a moment, we were both silent, listening to the soft creaks of the old building. "Ashley's sentencing is next week," Mom said, breaking the silence. "She asked about you. She said she doesn't blame you." A pang of something I couldn't name settled in my chest. "I don't blame her either," I replied, surprising myself. "I blame the choices we all made, the ones that let it get this far." Mom nodded, her eyes misting. "We failed you both. I see that now. Your father and I, we lost sight of what was right." I glanced at her, searching for the defensiveness that had always been there before. But it was gone. All that remained was a mother who had finally seen the damage left in the wake of misplaced loyalty. "I'm trying to move past it," I said slowly. But it's not easy. It shouldn't be, she said, a small, sad smile touching her lips. But I hope you know we're proud of you, Emily. We always were, even when we didn't show it. Her words hung in the air, both balm and burden. It would take more than a conversation to heal years of neglect, but maybe it was a start. I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. As Mom stood to leave, she paused by the door. We're starting over, your father and I. It won't be perfect, but we're trying. I met her eyes, softer now, and gave a small, tentative smile. Good. Maybe we all deserve that. When the door closed behind her, I leaned back, the quiet of the room wrapping around me like a familiar blanket. Outside, snow began to fall, gentle and steady, blanketing the world in a soft, clean layer. For the first time in years, the future felt like something I could reach for, something I could shape with my own hands. I didn't know what lay ahead for Ashley, or what would become of the fragile threads connecting our family. But I did know that we were no longer trapped in the patterns of the past. And as the snow whispered against the window, I allowed myself a moment of peace, feeling the weight of the old wounds begin to lift. We were not whole, but we were moving. And sometimes that was enough.